In the 1930s, Germany opened a school with a single purpose: not to teach children, to train soldiers, and not to advance medicine or technology for the war efforts, but instead to teach dogs to speak. And the Nazi regime didn't just tolerate it, but were actively fascinated by it. Because if dogs could think, reason, and communicate, it confirmed something about the German soul that Hitler desperately wanted to believe. This is the story of the Tier-Sprechschule, the animal speech school, and it is one of the strangest, most revealing corners of the entire Third Reich. A story that starts with a dog tapping its paw and ends with questions we're still asking today. The Tier-Sprechschule was founded in the 1930s in Germany, run by a woman named Margaret Schmidt. She wasn't stupid or disrespected in her career either. She was a genuine believer in animal intelligence, and she had the visitors to prove it. Academics, journalists, military officials, and curious members of the German public all came to watch. What they saw stopped them cold. Dogs sitting across from humans, tapping their paws in coded sequences, apparently spelling out words. Apparently even answering questions and expressing opinions about the very world they lived in. A dog named Rolf became one of the school's most famous pupils. Rolf, an Airedale Terrier it was claimed, could discuss philosophy. He reportedly communicated, through tapped code, that he did not want to be a dog in his next life. He had thoughts about religion. He had preferences. He had grievances. He had, by Schmidt's account, an interior life, a genuine perspective on his own existence. Another dog apparently complained, in careful tapped sequence, about the quality of its meals. A third asked to be taken for a walk, and another, according to one account, expressed what could only be described as existential dissatisfaction. Play this completely straight for a moment, because the people involved were playing it straight. This wasn't a circus act or entertainment. It wasn't even fringe pseudoscience operating in the shadows. It was presented as legitimate research, serious, documented, repeatable science. And it was taken seriously, not just in Germany, but across Europe, where newspapers reported on the school's findings with genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. Which raises the obvious question: why? Why did serious people, educated people, officials, scientists not immediately see through it? The answer to that question leads us to the Third Reich and how the story developed out of control. To understand why the Nazi regime was interested in talking dogs, you have to understand something about Nazi ideology that goes beyond the history book headlines. The Nazis didn't just rank humans in their racial hierarchy. Their worldview extended outward, into nature, into animals, into the entire biological world. Central to Völkisch ideology was the idea that Germans had a unique, almost spiritual bond with the natural world. With the land, with the forests, with animals, particularly with dogs. This wasn't incidental. It wasn't a soft cultural preference sitting alongside the hard ideology. It was foundational to how the regime understood itself. Hermann Göring, the man who oversaw the Luftwaffe and who would later play a central role in the Holocaust, banned live animal trapping and imposed strict hunting regulations. He reportedly threatened to send anyone who mistreated animals to a concentration camp. Hitler passed some of the most progressive animal cruelty legislation in Europe in 1933. The same regime constructing concentration and death camps was simultaneously legislating against the mistreatment of lobsters. Ironic, right? This isn't hypocrisy in the way we usually use the word. It's something more disturbing. A coherent worldview in which certain lives mattered enormously and others didn't register as lives at all. Hitler's relationship with his German shepherd, Blondie, wasn't just personal affection. It was ideological. A man who loved his dog with that depth, who trusted an animal more than he trusted most humans, was demonstrating something about his character that the regime actively promoted. The German bond with animals wasn't sentiment. It was recognition. A meeting of kindred natures. So, when a school emerged claiming that dogs could think, reason, and speak, that they had rich interior lives worthy of serious study, Nazi officials didn't laugh. They listened. Because if true, it validated something profound about the German relationship with the natural world. Documents from the period show officials seriously entertaining proposals built directly on the Tier-Sprechschule's work. The most striking: dogs trained to communicate well enough to serve in intelligence roles. Animals moving through occupied territory, carrying or conveying information in ways no human courier could. No enemy would suspect a dog. No checkpoint would detain one. It sounds absurd. It was absurd. But it was discussed in earnest by serious men in official correspondence with the full weight of the regime behind it. And that tells you everything about what happens when ideology is allowed to override reality. Here's what was actually happening at the Tier-Sprechschule. In 1900, a horse named Hans became famous across Germany for apparently doing mathematics. His owner, Wilhelm von Osten, would pose arithmetic questions, and Hans would tap his hoof the correct number of times. Newspapers covered it. Scientists visited. The German establishment took it seriously. Hans became a national sensation, proof, some argued, of the profound intelligence of animals. In 1907, a psychologist named Oskar Pfungst ran a properly controlled experiment. He discovered that Hans wasn't doing mathematics. Hans was reading people. When the questioner knew the answer, Hans got it right. When the questioner was kept behind a screen, or genuinely didn't know the answer themselves, Hans failed completely. Mathematics vanished the moment human knowledge vanished. What Hans had learned through observation, through repetition, through whatever passes for patience in a horse, was to read the unconscious physical signals of the humans around him. A tiny tension in the shoulders when he approached the right number, a fractional shift in posture, a micro-expression the humans themselves had no idea they were producing. Nobody was cheating. Von Osten genuinely believed Hans could count. Even the crowds believed it. The scientists who visited believed it, at least initially. Hans, in his way, was doing something remarkable, just not what anyone in that room thought. This became known as the clever Hans effect, and it is almost certainly the complete explanation for everything that happened at the Tier-Sprechschule. The dogs weren't spelling words. They weren't discussing philosophy or complaining about their food or asking to go for walks. They were reading their handlers with a sensitivity so acute, so finely calibrated, that it produced outputs that looked exactly like language to anyone who wanted to see language there. Every tap, every pause, every sequence, guided by signals so small, no human observer could consciously detect them, but which the dogs had learned to read with extraordinary precision. Which is, and this is the part that matters, genuinely remarkable. Just not in the way anyone at the school believed. Modern animal cognition research has established that dogs are among the most socially intelligent animals on the planet. A border collie named Chaser learned over 1,000 individual words, verified under controlled conditions. Dogs can identify human emotional states from facial expressions alone, distinguishing happiness from anger with accuracy that surprises even researchers who study them. They can solve problems that defeat chimpanzees in certain contexts, precisely because they've evolved to work with humans rather than independently of them. 15,000 years of living alongside us has shaped dogs into something almost uniquely attuned to human behavior. They don't just observe us, they specialize in us. The tragedy of the Tier-Sprechschule is that they were sitting directly on top of one of the most fascinating demonstrations of animal intelligence ever recorded. And they completely misread what they were seeing, because they were looking for what they already believed. And the dogs, being dogs, gave it to them. As Germany's war machine ground toward its end, the Tier-Sprechschule faded with it. Resources collapsed. Officials had more pressing concerns than philosophical dogs. The careful records Schmidt had kept were largely lost, destroyed in bombing, scattered in the chaos of retreat, or simply abandoned when the regime that had given the school its cultural oxygen ceased to exist. Margaret Schmidt's ultimate fate is not clearly documented. The school closed, the dogs moved on or didn't. The spy dog proposals produced no operational outcome of any kind. No intelligence asset, no military application, nothing that outlasted the war. What it produced, entirely inadvertently, was a footnote that would outlast the Reich by decades. The clever Hans effect is now a foundational concept in animal psychology and behavioral science. It shapes how researchers design experiments, why controlled studies use handlers who don't know the expected answer, why screens and barriers are standard protocol in animal cognition testing. Funkst's 1907 discovery didn't just debunk one horse, it changed the methodology of an entire field. And then it migrated further, into artificial intelligence, into machine learning. The problem of a system that appears to understand but produces correct, convincing outputs without actually comprehending anything is now one of the defining questions of our technological moment. We are building systems that are extraordinary at reading human signals and producing responses that look like understanding. Whether anything more than that is happening is a question nobody has yet answered cleanly. The Tier-Sprechschule, in its bizarre, ideologically driven, entirely unintentional way, stumbled onto something real, not talking dogs, something more interesting and more troubling, the question of what intelligence actually is, how we recognize it, how desperately we want to find it, how easily we project it onto whatever is sitting in front of us. The Nazi regime was so convinced of its own worldview that it bent science, nature, and reality itself to confirm what it already believed. The dogs weren't speaking. They were listening, with extraordinary precision, to every unconscious signal their handlers gave them. Following cues so subtle, the handlers didn't know they were producing them, which means the dogs of the Tier-Sprechschule were doing something far more interesting than talking. They were holding up a mirror, and nobody in that room was willing to look at their own reflection.